because consumer spending constitutes 71% of the American economy. How can we grow if the consumer, it represents 71% of the American economy? Well, the bottom line is that the 71% of the American economy is too high. Here's the range in which the consumers play. You see we're very close to our all-time high. Here's the range for investment, range for government, and range for our trade balance, or our net exports. Here's the goal, and this is my goal, but this is, I think, is a reasonable goal. And you may think that dropping down from 71% to 65% is no big deal. It is a big deal, and it's going to require a major transformation. Investment, we need up to 17 to 18% of GDP needs to be demand for investment goods. If the economy is going to expand, you see, I have imposed an enormous burden on you. I retired. And you have to support me now. And I want to be supported in a lifestyle I've become accustomed to. Now, how are you going to support me? The only way you can support me is to continue that trend that we had on that graph of increased labor productivity. I tell my kids this all the time. I said, you've got to work harder, and you've got to be more efficient. And you're only going to be more efficient if we continue to expand the capital base of this nation. This is pathetic, way too low. We need to have about 17 to 18% of GDP set aside for investment for the future. Government needs to be pruned down, I want you to know this number here is government demand. This is government demand for goods and services. This would include military, but this would include transfer payments. Obviously, you know that the government spending is more than 17% of GDP, but so much of it is transfer payments. Government can be sized down. We need a trade deficit that's zero. We need to balance the budget, balance the trade deficit. That's only doable. This is only doable, ironically, if we do this. And I'll tell Mark in advance, the first quarter 2011 head of the curve is going to be talking about what everybody's talking about right now, and that's the trade wars, the currency wars, okay? And the argument that's going on back and forth between China and the United States. We want the Chinese to deflate or to inflate the yuan. And we're arguing that they're manipulating the currency, though we haven't got the guts to go to the World Trade Organization and say that. But the problem isn't just China. The problem is us. Because when we're dissaving, so you got the federal government that's borrowing $1.2 trillion a year. You got the consumer borrowing. So we're going into the world capital markets, and the U.S. as a whole is borrowing somewhere between $1 trillion and $1.5 trillion a year. Then the bottom line is that we're going to have a trade deficit. And we're going to have a trade deficit that we can't escape no matter what we do. No matter how punitive we are to the Chinese, we can't, as long as we're borrowing $1.5 trillion in foreign markets. That's $1 trillion of foreign money that's not being spent on American goods. It will not disappear. But if we solve the savings problem and we solve the government deficit problem, we will solve this problem. This is feasible. This notion somehow that Americans can't be competitive, that jobs are going abroad, and it's all inevitable, and we've got to face up to the new reality that the United States is a second-rate economy, is sheer nonsense. It is doable. We can have a balanced trade budget, but it requires us to exercise some discipline and some pain that Americans, it's not our politicians, it's Americans as a whole, don't seem to want to struggle with. So, real quickly, Houston. It's the only slide I've got on Houston, because I wanted to tell you talk about the national story, the most important story. Here's what I think Houston's going to do. My counterpart at the University of Houston took over for me for a couple of symposiums. We're pretty much in agreement with regards to what's going to happen next year. We're going to see modest growth in Houston's economy. This is a little bit more iffy. This is iffy because if we choose not to finish the job, then we will end up in a double-dip recession. If we choose not to finish the job and we end up in a double-dip recession, you can scratch these numbers because Houston will be affected. If the United States goes into a double-dip recession and the Chinese and the rest of the Pacific Rim are committed to reducing inflation by slowing their economies down, you'll see the price of oil drop. Price of natural gas still remains low. We're going to see much worse performance if we don't finish the job. We've got to finish the job, and I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. Whether we as Americans, I don't blame the politicians. It's us Americans. Are we willing to finish the job? We've got people that will argue we've got to balance the budget, but no plans. No plans, because the plans are hard and they mean some sacrifice. Thank you.
This is the part of the conversation where we invite you to jump in and ask some questions. It can be Houston-based, it can be of a national order, but you've got a rare opportunity here to pick the brain of one of the finest economists in the region, and I would encourage any kind of question from the audience. I can start it off, but
what's your opinion? Do we really need QE1, and what's this QE2? What was it really going to do for us?
The QE2, yeah, I do believe we need QE1. I think that the whole emotion over bailouts and so forth was an overkill. Those that argue that the bailouts shouldn't occur, where I am in favor of bailouts and still giving CEOs $20 million a year incomes, no. Could there have been a better bailout? Yes, but we needed a bailout, and there's no question about it. What about QE2? I think QE2 has some benefits, but it has some really potential downside risks down the road. We won't feel the risks next year, but we could feel them in 2012 and 2013. Right now, the Federal Reserve Bank has about $1.2 trillion in excess reserves. That's why the federal funds rate is so low. Basically zero. Because the banks don't have to worry about meeting their legal reserve. They're afloat in reserves. Sooner or later, the Federal Reserve is going to have to get rid of those excess reserves. They are going to have to unload $1.2 trillion on the private market. That's going to be painful, and that's likely to mean substantially higher interest rates. Now you've got QE2, and what are they going to do? They're going to add to that $1.2 trillion another $0.6 trillion, another $600 billion. It's going to make the problem of unwinding even more difficult down the road. Might it give a temporary help and stimulus to the American economy in 2011? Yes.
So what's